Today, we're digging into a paradox at the very heart of the most destructive war in human history. And it's a paradox that might just challenge everything you think you know about how it all started.
You know, our whole understanding of World War II is built on one massive assumption, that it was all part of some meticulous, evil plan. But what if that's not the case? What if the war wasn't a plan at all, but a gigantic, tragic accident?
So, to really get what we're talking about, we first have to start with a story that became the accepted truth for decades. The story that pretty much everyone believed after the war.
Historians call this the orthodox view, and it paints a picture of Adolf Hitler not just as this monster, but as a kind of evil genius, a grand chess master who was moving entire countries around the board, all according to a pre-written script for taking over the world.
The thinking here is pretty straightforward, right? Every single move, rebuilding the army, marching back into the Rhineland, taking over Austria, it's all seen as just one more calculated step in a very long game. And that infamous book, Mein Kampf, well, in this view, it wasn't just propaganda. It was the actual instruction manual. The invasion of Poland in 1939, that date was supposedly circled on his calendar from the very beginning.
But then, back in 1961, this rock-solid idea that everyone agreed on was completely shattered by one man and one book.
And that man was A.J.P. Taylor. He was this brilliant, really popular, and you could say famously rebellious historian. He had a reputation for poking holes in historical certainties, but honestly, nobody was ready for what he was about to say about the start of World War II.
And there it is. This is the sentence that basically set the historical world on fire. Taylor just came out and said it. The Second World War wasn't planned at all. It was a massive mistake, a result of screw-ups and diplomatic failures by everyone involved.
So you're probably thinking, how on earth could anyone possibly argue that? Well, let's break down Taylor's super controversial perspective.
Okay, so what you're seeing here are two completely different versions of Hitler. The orthodox view gives us the master planner, a guy who actively forces history to bend to his will. But Taylor's view, that gives us the patient opportunist. This Hitler still has big ambitions, for sure, but he doesn't have a concrete plan. Instead, he just waits. He waits for his opponents to trip up, to make a mistake, and then he makes his move.
Now this was maybe the part of Taylor's argument that got him into the most hot water. He suggested that Hitler's big foreign policy goals, making Germany powerful again, dominating Central Europe, weren't actually new or unique to him. They were the same old goals that German leaders had wanted for a long, long time. The methods were horrifying, of course, but the ambition itself, Taylor said, was ordinary.
This quote really nails Taylor's whole idea. For his version of Hitler, having a detailed plan was actually a weakness. It would have tied his hands. His real talent was improvisation, just reacting to things as they happened and keeping all his options on the table. He knew where he wanted to go, but he had absolutely no map for how to get there.
All right, so let's put this theory to the test. Let's look at two huge moments on the path to war, but see them through these two totally different viewpoints.
So according to Taylor, this was Hitler's MO, his method. He didn't create the crisis. He just waited for someone else to mess up. And once they did, he'd look at his opponents, see how weak and divided they were, and then he'd pounce, acting fast and making it up as he went along.
Let's take the annexation of Austria, the Anschluss. The traditional story says this was a long-planned, perfectly executed step in the master plan. But Taylor says, hold on a second, the invasion was actually a chaotic, last-minute panic. It only happened because the Austrian chancellor, out of nowhere, called for a vote on Austrian independence. Hitler wasn't following a plan. He was scrambling to stop a vote he was terrified he was going to lose.
And now for the big one, the thing that actually kicked off the war. The standard view is that when Britain guaranteed to protect Poland, it was this noble, heroic moment. They were finally standing up to a bully. But for Taylor, this was the biggest blunder of them all. He argued that it backed Poland into a corner where they couldn't negotiate. And even worse, it made Hitler think the British were bluffing. I mean, why would they go to war for Poland when they hadn't for Czechoslovakia? In Taylor's view, this move, which was meant to stop a war, actually made it unavoidable.
So when you step back and look at the entire timeline through Taylor's lens, the story just completely changes. It stops looking like a march of destiny and starts looking like a domino effect of human error.
This timeline really shows the shift. Each step isn't part of some grand scheme anymore. Sending troops into the Rhineland becomes a pure gamble, betting that France was too divided to do anything. The Munich Agreement isn't just seen as cowardice, but as a flawed, yet maybe rational, attempt to avoid war. And the big one, the invasion of Poland becomes a massive miscalculation. Hitler thought he was just starting a small, local war, because he was absolutely convinced Britain and France would back down one last time.
And look, this is so important to understand. Taylor's point was never ever to excuse Hitler or make him seem less monstrous. The goal was to ask a much bigger question about how history itself works. Is it really driven by these brilliant individuals with flawless plans, or is it something far messier, something driven by chance, by mistakes, and by plain old human error?
In the end, what A.J.P. Taylor did was force us all to face a really uncomfortable question, one that goes way beyond 1939. When we look at the great turning points in our past, are we really seeing the results of some intricate master plan? Or are we just looking at the fallout from a series of monumental mistakes?